Welcome to According to Sam, folks. This is episode 397. Hope you guys had a good holiday weekend, Passover, Easter, and all of that. We're going to pick up where we left off in the last podcast, but I want to begin this podcast by giving a recap of all of the podcasts that we've done over the last 6 months. I was thinking about when I started doing these podcasts, focusing on Jewish history, telling the story of Jewish history. It was after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and that was last September. But I didn't start this series of podcasts telling Jewish history immediately. I think it was around October. One of the earliest podcasts that I did covering this was the podcast titled Snake Eyes. So from October to first week of April now, it's been about 6 months, maybe even a little longer than 6 months, that for 2 times a week, on Friday and on Monday, I've been covering Jewish history, going back to the reign of Solomon and Solomon's Temple, telling the story of Solomon's Temple and the esoteric meanings behind Solomon's Temple and Freemasonry and all that. We talked about the Mormon religion, and that the Mormon religion is also a Abrahamic religion. And you'll say, no, well, the Mormon religion is Christian. Of course, it's a Abrahamic religion. No, but the Mormon religion, when you understand it, that the beliefs around Mormon theology, that Jews who were not Christians left the area of Israel, the kingdom of Israel, before the destruction of Solomon's Temple. This is what Mormons believe. This is what Joseph Smith wrote in the Book of Mormon, that these Jews fleeing the kingdom of Israel came to the Americas, and all of the Native Americans in the Americans are descendants from these Jews. And we talked about all that. We talked about, again, Freemasonry and the esoteric meanings behind Solomon's Temple. Then we got into Solomon's Temple. We're going to go through and cover all of this and show what we've talked about over the past 6 months. But I just wanted to state the fact that it's been 6 months that we've been telling the history of the Jews. And we're going to pick it back up again today. I have a lot to share with you. But like I said, we started with Solomon's Temple and the building of Solomon's Temple, and talking about the builders of Solomon's Temple, Hiram Abiff being one, who is a very important master builder in Freemasonry. And we talked about the esoteric meanings and how everything in Freemasonry is all their symbology is centered around Solomon's Temple. We talked about the fact that Solomon ruled over a united Hebrew empire. He took the throne of the kingdom of Israel, and from his father David, King David, the famous King David, and then Solomon, his son, carries on the dynasty. But then after Solomon's death, we talked about how the kingdoms split into two. That after Solomon's death, his son Rehoboam basically became the king, and Jeroboam is a figure who split from the kingdom, from the ruling tribe of Judah, and he created the kingdom of Israel to the north, and it comprised of 10 of the 12 tribes. And then Judah and Benjamin, those two tribes made up the kingdom of Judah to the south. So there were 13 tribes. I explained when we told this history that one of the tribes didn't have any plot of land, the Levites. The Levites were the priest. And after the kingdoms split, because the temple, Solomon's Temple, was in Judah, Jeroboam did not want the members of the 10 tribes in the north to go back into Judah to give sacrifices during Passover and Yom Kippur and the Jewish holidays. Jeroboam did not want these people from the 10 tribes where he was now ruling to go back into Judah to the temple, because he felt that they would unite with Judah and then they would come and overthrow him in the kingdom of Israel. So he set up shrines that became pagan shrines. He set up one in Dan. He set up one in Bethel, and they started worshiping other gods in the kingdom of Israel, and they started dabbling into paganism and idolatry and all of that. And the punishment from God was the Assyrian captivity. The Assyrians come in and they scatter. This is the beginning of the scattering of the diaspora, where the northern 10 tribes are scattered and taken into exile by the Assyrians, the Assyrian captivity, the Assyrian exile. And that's where you get the 10 lost tribes, because the 10 tribes to the north are scattered. And we covered all of that. And then we covered the period of time. There's about 100 years, about a century between the Assyrian captivity and then what is known as the Babylonian captivity and the Babylonian exile. And this is when the Babylonians come in and then they destroy the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah, for the same reason. The Bible says, the Jewish texts, the Jewish scriptures say that the reason that the northern 10 tribes were scattered by the Assyrians is because of their idolatry and their paganism and worshiping idol gods, that they were destroyed by the Assyrians. But the Bible also says that the kingdom of Judah, 100 years later, the reason that they are destroyed and taken into exile by the Babylonians is for the same reason, because of idolatry, because of the King Manasseh bringing idols of Baal and Asherah into the temple, into Solomon's temple, defiling Solomon's temple, leading the entire kingdom of Judah into idol worship. And that's why God destroyed the temple and took the kingdom of Judah into exile. Now, before Judah was taken into exile, during the reign of Solomon, and even when the kingdom split, these were Hebrews. They were known as Hebrews. The word Judah, the word Jew comes from Judah. That's what we use in common parlance today to refer to all of the 12 tribes and descendants of Abraham. They're all Jews, but back then they would have called themselves Hebrews. That's very important, because when the Babylonian exile is over and all of these people who were taken into exile into Babylon, when they were freed by Cyrus the Great, when he conquers the Babylonians, he frees the Hebrews. They were Hebrews or Judeans that were in Babylon, and then they go back and rebuild the temple. And when they come back, they're Jews. They all come from Judah, and that's when the term Hebrew starts to be, less. It's not used as much as it was prior to that. Basically, the term Jew. They're living in Judea. There are people from the tribe of Judah. They're Jews. So that's when the term Jew starts to be used. But explain that when Cyrus gives the decree for the Jews, the people of Judea, to go back. Well, we talked about this part, talked about the book of Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar's dream that he has, that Daniel interprets, about the 4 different metals that represented 4 different kingdoms that the Jews were going to live under. Actually 5 different kingdoms, but the 5th kingdom is iron mixed with clay. We talked about all of that and the meaning behind the statue. And then when the Jews leave Babylon, when Cyrus the Great gives the decree for the Jews to go back to Judea and build the temple. He didn't give the decree just for them to go back. It's in the Bible. We read through this that when Cyrus gives the edict of Cyrus for them to go back, they are instructed to rebuild the temple as well. This is in the Bible, which claims to authorize and encourage the return to Zion. This is the second Zionist movement, the migration of Jews, Hebrews outside of Zion into Zion, return to Zion, and the rebuilding of the temple. The temple is central. So you go from Solomon's temple to the rebuilding of the temple to Zerubbabel's temple, and then you enter this period that we've been talking about, the Second Temple period. The Second Temple period is a 600-year period from the beginning of the or the end of the Babylonian exile, the rebuilding of the Second Temple, to the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD when the Romans destroy the Second Temple. This is the period called Second Temple period, which we've been talking about. We talked about the Maccabees. We talked about Alexander the Great actually conquering the Achaemenian Persians and creating the Greek Empire, and then in the middle of his conquest, Alexander the Great dies, and then that brings in the War of the Diadochi, his successors, and we talked about the two main empires that developed after Alexander the Great, the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Empire, and they were fighting each other, and the Jews were there in the middle of their fight, and how that contributed to the Maccabean revolt. That would also contribute to the Maccabean revolt, which we talked about, is the civil war that was going on within Judea between the rural Jews that were more religious and more orthodox in their religious beliefs, and the urban Jews that lived in Judea that were more Hellenistic, that were adopting even polytheism and all of the, pagan worship and all that stuff. And that civil war for the position of high priest, because at this time, the position of high priest in the Sanhedrin was the most important spiritual and political position in Judea at this time. That the position of high priest had become the leader of the Sanhedrin of the 70. He was the leading political and spiritual leader. Very, very powerful position. And the civil war that was going on within Judea because of this position is what launched the Maccabean revolt, which actually Antiochus Epiphanes basically chose sides in that Jewish civil war, and he chose the sides of the Hellenistic Jews. He desecrated the temple, and that's what made the Maccabees rise up. The Maccabees win, and then they established the Hasmonean dynasty, which is the first Jewish kingdom, the first Jewish dynasty since the destruction of Solomon's temple, and they established this dynasty for about 100 years until the Romans conquer them again, and they become a state. Palestine becomes a state in the Roman Empire. So we've been talking about all of that. That's where we've been over the last 6 months of telling this history. And I've been weaving back and forth and talking about contemporary things that are going on and how it relates to that history. And I felt that it was very important to tell this history, particularly after Charlie Kirk's. What was it about Charlie Kirk's assassination that kicked off this series of 6 months studying Jewish history? Is because, all of the talk right now is about the Jewish influence on not only the United States, but the world, and people speculating that there's this Jewish conspiracy that dominate the world, and the Jews are running our foreign policy, and they're the ones who assassinated Charlie Kirk, many people believe. So that's why I was telling this story and trying to give you a deeper understanding of who the Jewish people are. And if you've been following along, you know that I've been reiterating over and over again, there is no Jewish monolith. There never has been. That Jews, the reason that the two kingdoms split after Solomon's death is because of Jews fighting amongst each other. Jewish factions that couldn't get along with each other. That you have 12 different tribes of people, different people, and you know anything about tribes and the tribal nature of human beings, that they don't get along. They've never gotten along. There's always been Jews that believe one thing and other Jews that don't believe that. Jews that are, the word that Barry Strauss used in that trigonometry podcast, it was disputatious, prone to dispute. The Jews are prone to dispute, not just with other people, but within their own Jewish communities, with themselves. They fight with each other. They have been fighting with each other, and there is no Jewish monolith. And there hasn't been throughout Jewish history, and there is not today. There is no Jewish monolith. So we've been talking about the temple because the temple is central to everything for a certain sect of Jews. Not all Jews think that rebuilding a third temple or even the ruins of the second temple are that important, but there are a faction of Jews who do believe that these ruins are holy and that it's important. And it's also important that they rebuild the second temple as well. The Temple Institute is a group that was established in the late 80s, I believe like 1987, 89. This would have been during the George H.W. Bush administration. But the Temple Institute is at the forefront of leading the effort for rebuilding the third temple. And we'll read a little bit about the Temple Institute on this Wikipedia page here. It says the Temple Institute is an organization in Israel focused on establishing the third temple. Its long-term aims are to build the third temple in Jerusalem on Temple Mount, the site occupied by the Dome of the Rock. That's the problem. The Dome of the Rock's there. And to restate Korbanot and the other rites described in the Hebrew Bible and the Jewish legal literature. The Temple Institute aspires to build the third temple, despite the fact that the Dome of the Rock sits there. We'll start with this clip. This is a clip from the Temple Institute's Wikipedia page. Their YouTube page. You can see they have nearly 100,000 subscribers on their YouTube page. This is official Temple Institute YouTube page. Take a listen to this video.
I'm Yitzhak Reuven. I'm the director of the International Department of the Temple Institute. Today, our goal more than ever is to reach out to the world and to spread awareness about the Holy Temple, the potential and the beauty that it holds for the entire world. Now I'm going to introduce you to the people who make this happen.
קוראים לי עזריה אריאל, אני אחראי על המכון התורני בית הבחירה. לפני כשנתיים הגיעו ארצה 5 פרות.
So they're talking about the red heifers. And he says that we got the red heifers are showing. If you're listening audience, they're showing the red heifers that they have, which have to be sacrificed. So they're making the preparations.
מול מקום המקדש צריך להיות עם כהן שהוא בעצמו טהור. רק בעזרת הפרה האדומה נוכל להיחלץ מהטומאה, להיות טהורים לגמרי, ונוכל לגשת למצוות של המקדש וגם תרומות ומעשרות.
So he says that they already have their priesthood set up, the Sanhedrin. We told you that the Sanhedrin. He told you that the priesthood, the Sanhedrin, has been reconvened. The Sanhedrin has also, they're the ones that are putting gas in President Trump's tank, basically saying that he is the reincarnation or the they're basically relating him to Cyrus the Great. They're the ones who asked Trump to create the Sanhedrin, to create a new international body based on the Noahide laws. So they have the priesthood. They have this is what the video is showing. We have the red heifers. We have the artifacts and the vestments that we need for the temple. These guys are ready to go.
אני שמשון אלבוים, ואחת הפעולות המשמעותיות שאני זוכה לעשות פה במסגרת המכון, זה מה שנקרא תרגולי המקדש. אנחנו משחזרים מחדש את העבודה של בית המקדש בחגים. אנחנו זוכים לעשות אותם היום ממש למרגלות הר הבית, ובאמת יוצאים מפה עם דרישת מקדש בלב, וזה התרומה.
So basically what they're saying, if you don't understand what they're saying, it's subtitles, especially if you're listening, you're not watching, but basically what they're saying, they're ready to go. They got everything ready. They got everything that they need to start the rebuilding of the temple right now if they get the word go. The Temple Institute has been since 1987 raising money, creating the items that they need for the temple, getting all the materials they need for the building of the temple. The Temple Institute is ready to go. Now, most of the money that is donated to the Temple Institute, where do you think it comes from? You think it comes from Jews? A lot of it comes from Jews. A lot of it comes from American Christians. A lot of it comes from evangelical Christians that are donating and giving their time and their efforts and laboring over the rebuilding of a third temple. And that's why we've been asking the question on this podcast, is it a Christian endeavor? Should Christians be giving money to working towards the rebuilding of a third temple? I haven't answered that question for you, but I said I'm going to keep giving you as much information as I can to see if you can come up with the answer yourself. Now, Kabbalah. What do you know about Kabbalah? Well, you're going to know a lot more when I do a podcast on Kabbalah, because I'm going to do a deep dive in Kabbalah. But Kabbalah in basic concept is that it is Jewish mysticism. And it basically takes the Jewish text and it takes it to the deepest levels, is what they'll tell you. The Kabbalah means to receive. So there's a lot of stuff in Kabbalah. Like, to give you one example, the story of Lilith. Lilith was Adam's first wife, not Eve, but Lilith did not want to submit to Adam. So her and Adam basically split up, and then Eve became Adam's set. All this are these stories and mystic traditions that elaborate and expand on the Torah and the Hebrew text, and it's mysticism is what it comes down to. Like I said, we'll talk more about Kabbalah in a future podcast, but the temple is very, very important to Kabbalists. We talked about the different Abrahamic religions and the fact that there are religious fanatics, religious zealots, religious fundamentalists in Islam, in Christianity, in Judaism. But also I said that there's religious fanatics, religious zealots, religious fundamentalists in the occult. And the occult paganism, occult polytheism is the oldest religion on this planet, the mystic religion. So ask the question, is Kabbalah occult mysticism, or is it Jewish mysticism? Well, it's both. It's occult and it's also Jewish, but it's mostly occult. But again, we'll get into that. But a lot of these people that that pretend to be secular may believe in Kabbalah, or some of these people who pretend to be Orthodox Jew are into Kabbalah. Kabbalah is something that came about in the medieval period of Jewish history, which again, we're going to get into that as we move along into this history. But the thing that you need to understand is that the temple in Kabbalah is very important to the concept of the Messiah. It says right here, the third temple, first in our hearts, then in stone. The concept of the third temple in Kabbalah is deeply intertwined with the idea of Messiah and the temple's role in the Jewish faith. The third temple is often seen as a symbol of ultimate restoration of the Jewish people and the fulfillment of the messianic dream. It represents the return of the temple to Jerusalem and the presence of the Messiah and the establishment of a new era of peace and justice. And what Kabbalists believe is that the temple is essential for the Messiah to come. And we'll talk about that, like I said, more as when we get into a podcast about Kabbalah. But I want you to take a look at this clip. Now, this is Yishay Flesher, very popular YouTuber, Jewish YouTuber, and he commentates on all things Jewish. But he's talking to this other Jewish woman, and they are so fascinated that Nick Fuentes understands their Kabbalah traditions. I just want you to watch this, and then I'm going to commentate on it. Take a listen.
Man. Oh, you really don't get it, do you? I've been saying it for years. Nobody listens.
I'm going to start. So this is a comment that someone sends into Nick Fuentes, and it's about, I've played the clip before of Benjamin Netanyahu. He's actually asked a question about what he's reading. What are you reading right now? And he says, I'm reading Barry Strauss's Rome Against the Jews. And he says that we lost that one. We have to win the next one. And I've played the clips before of Netanyahu repeatedly saying that the West, the Edomites, the America is the new Rome, that America is the new Rome, the West is the new Rome, that we're the new Rome. And Netanyahu says that we have to win that one, that he's reading Barry Strauss's book. So this is a comment that comes into Nick Fuentes, and this is what he's commenting on.
Netanyahu says it, nobody listens. It's about Jacob and Esau, okay? It's about the Jews and the nations. For them, it's a cosmic battle. So there's something eternal about it, but it really does go back to the expulsion from Israel. It is about the temple. It is about the rebellions. For them, they see Rome as the epitome of the Goyim that are obstructing God's will. They think that the Jews were chosen to bring God back into the world, to unlock the essence of God that is trapped inside the shards of, this is all like Kabbalistic mysticism. And they think that like we are standing in the way of that by impeding the Jews going to all the nations and rebuilding the temple and getting back to Israel. They think that we're preventing.
So funny. Look at their faces. They're reacting to this because they're so surprised that Nick Fuentes understands their Kabbalistic traditions and what Kabbalah teaches. Why? Because Kabbalah is a cult. A cult is hidden. The average everyday Goem is not supposed to understand the deep traditions of Kabbalah. And they're so impressed with Nick Fuentes understanding what they actually believe. It's hilarious.
Words of, this is all like Kabbalistic mysticism. And they think that like we are standing in the way of that by impeding the Jews going to all the nations and rebuilding the temple and getting back to Israel. They think that we're preventing the universe from being repaired by the Jews. And this is embodied in the Roman Church, the Roman Empire, the modern Roman Empire, which is the United States. That's a very deep subject. I don't want to get all into it. I got into it in my group chat.
All right, so he goes on, but the bottom line is, he somehow has an understanding, this guy Fuentes, has an understanding of the rebuilding of the temple, of the ingathering of the exiles, of even I think he was hinting to the concept of bringing God's presence down into this lower domain, into Jerusalem. He mentioned the Kabbalah. Do you see, Malka? Other like commentators
are like
shards,
the nitzotzot. That is a Hasidic principle. That is a Kabbalistic principle that there are like shards of light out in the world, and that it's our job to collect them.
Do you understand? Like this guy is not like with all of his
he gets like he understand like he has some things that he so profoundly doesn't understand, but then there are some things that he like really understands.
I'm telling you, I would not be surprised if one day this guy is learning Torah in Bnei Brak. Okay.
That's hilarious, because they're so shocked that he understands this stuff, because you're not supposed to understand this stuff. Nick Fuentes is not supposed to understand about the Kabbalistic principles and the shards of light and all that stuff. And there, if you go in and watch this video longer, I mean, they're really impressed by him because, I mean, you're not supposed, this stuff is hidden. This is hidden. That's what the occult is. So the question that we've been asking is the question of the Christian response towards the rebuilding of the third temple. And we're going to get back into that with the remainder of this podcast. I played the clip before of this Tennessee pastor in his church. They're waving the flag of Israel, and he says this. Take a listen.
To evacuate up there on the hill and get a great big missile and blow that wicked dome of the rock plumb off of the spot where it's standing right now, so we can get that third temple rebuilt and usher in the coming of Jesus.
So we can get that third temple built and usher in the coming of Jesus. This is Greg Locke, evangelical pastor out of Tennessee. And there are a lot of Christians, American Christians, who believe that we need to get that third temple built to usher in the coming of Jesus. A lot of American Christians, dispensationalist Christians that probably won't say it the way that Greg Locke just said it, but they believe it. They're donating their money to Temple Institute. They're making all of the efforts to actually the red heifers. The reason that they found red heifers was this Christian in Texas, this rancher in Texas who was a Christian, and said, I got to get these red heifers for Israel, working towards that. Is that a Christian endeavor is what we've been asking. The rebuilding of the third temple. We know it's a Kabbalistic endeavor in the traditions of Kabbalah that Jews practice. We know that it's important for them. We know that it's important for many of the Orthodox Jews. Now, the secular Jews, like I was explaining to you when we talked about this in Israel, that the largest group of people in Israel, about 40% of Israel, are secular Jews. They don't care nothing about the rebuilding of the temple. But these people that are into Kabbalah and Orthodox Jews and these religious Jews, it's important to them. And that, again, goes to the fact that there is no Jewish monolith, that we're talking about factions. And so we have Christian factions that are zealots, fanatics, religious fanatics. And then you have Jewish factions that are zealots and religious fanatics. Again, you have the occult zealots and religious fanatics, and you have the Islamic zealots and religious fanatics. But the question is, should Christians be this giddy about blowing the Dome of the Rock off of Temple Mount, starting a global conflict that will engulf the world in war, so you can usher in the coming of Jesus? Where's that in the Bible? Where do you read in usher in the coming of Jesus? You're going to usher in something that you don't want. So I'll tell you that. All right. So we talked about the Dr. Maroof in the last podcast and played some clips of him talking about the dangers of the taking a big missile and blowing the Dome of the Rock off so you can rebuild the third temple. And Dr. Maroof, Muslim, I think that he's an archaeologist, but he was telling you the dangers of that the mosque is a equally holy site to the Kaaba. That is important not only to the Muslims that are there in Palestine and in the West Bank and in the region, that it is important to Muslims worldwide, and it would set the world on fire if you blew up the mosque and started to rebuild the third temple. But I want you to listen to what Dr. Maroof says here.
Where does it come from? How credible it is? I know, of course, we question the credibility of these sources because we believe in the ultimate revelation of Quran. But I'm saying from their perspective, how credible are these sources?
You see, there is one note here. First, I'm going to give the note, then I'm going to give the perspective, the perspective. One note here. I remember that once Benjamin Netanyahu was standing in the Knesset, I think, and he said that Jerusalem is mentioned in the Bible.
This one right
that
here.
are actually organizing not only symbolic meetings, but actually organizing plans for the mosques, preparing priestly garments, temple vessels. It seems like this is not just a religious fantasy.
So he's talking about all of the stuff that I told you, but like the clip from Temple Institute, that they have all the garments already ready. They have all of the temple utensils and everything, all the materials ready to rebuild the temple. This is not just a fantasy that the organization Temple Institute has real supplies. They've reconvened the Sanhedrin. These people are ready to go. That's what he's talking about here. That it's not just some fantasy about destroying the mosque and rebuilding the temple.
In plans for the mosques, preparing priestly garments, temple vessels. It seems like this is not just a religious fantasy. There is a movement now behind replacing.
That's right.
Masjid al-Aqsa, Dome of the Rock, with the third temple.
Yes, that is absolutely right.
Yeah,
that is absolutely right. And actually, this is coming in the United States, for example, more than it is happening in Israel. And by the way, it is happening in...
Listen to what he's saying, that the movement towards rebuilding the third temple, that the movement is bigger in the United States, that the motivations and the push towards rebuilding the third temple is bigger in the United States than it is in Israel. That's what he says. Who do you think he's talking about here in the United States?
That is absolutely right.
Yeah,
that is absolutely right. And actually, this is coming in the United States, for example, more than it is happening in Israel. And by the way, it is happening amongst the evangelicals, more than it's happening in Christian evangelicals, more than it's happening amongst the some Jewish communities as well. Yeah. So it is quite interesting to see how this goal is being done in two different directions. However, all of them are taking the same direction, but from a different perspective.
So let's talk about that.
So this push towards the rebuilding of the third temple, he says, it's bigger in the United States with these Christian evangelicals, these dispensational Christian Zionists, if you want to call it. It's bigger with them. They're the ones donating the money. They're the ones that are making the push towards the rebuilding of the third temple. And then you have this faction of Jews, these Kabbalistic and religious Jews that are also pushing for the rebuilding of the third temple. And they have different beliefs. They have different motives for rebuilding the third temple. The Christians in the United States and the Kabbalistic and religious Jews, they're both moving towards the same objective and the same goal, the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the rebuilding of the third temple, but they have different motivations, is what he's saying. It's very interesting.
See how this goal is being done in two different directions. However, all of them are taking the same direction, but from a different perspective.
So let's talk about that different perspective, because I do want to understand the Christian evangelical position.
Yes.
Do they subscribe to the theology that you've just laid out about the rebuilding of the third temple? Obviously, they do.
Some do.
Explain their expansive philosophy. Like, what is it they're looking for?
Well, generally speaking, when we speak about the evangelicals in the United States, who are now controlling, by the way, the current administration in the United States.
This is very interesting.
The Minister of War believing in this.
So he says now you not only have Christian, evangelical pastors that are zealots and fanatics in their churches making fanatical statements that we need to blow up the Al-Aqsa Mosque so we can get that third temple built and usher in the coming of Jesus. You not only have that, is what Dr. Maroof is saying. You have members within the Trump administration who believe this, is what he says. And he mentions the Secretary of War, this guy This guy, Pete Hegseth. So what is he talking about when he says that even members of the Trump administration who are executing the current war right now, that are in charge of, he's the Secretary of War. And he's saying that he believes this. It's not only these fringe evangelical dispensational pastors, it's people like this.
And today, Jennifer and I and others had a chance to go see the western wall of the Temple Mount, the western wall tunnels, so much of the old city. And as you stand there, you can't help but behold the miracle before you. And it got me thinking about another miracle that I hope all of you don't see too far away. Because 1917 was a miracle, 1948 was a miracle, 1967 was a miracle, 2017, the declaration of Jerusalem as the capital was a miracle, and there's no reason why the miracle of the reestablishment of the temple on the Temple Mount is not possible.
So that's what Dr. Maroof is talking about. Here's another clip of the Secretary of War. Why don't you watch this one?
Providence of Almighty God. Is there any part of you, Mr. Secretary, that views any of this in a religious context?
I mean, obviously, we're fighting religious fanatics who seek a nuclear capability in order for some religious Armageddon. But from my perspective, I mean, obviously, I'm a man of faith who encourages our troops to lean into their faith.
Now, what faith is Pete Hegseth? I'm not sure. I don't know if he's a Catholic or not. I know that he has a tattoo, which is a Crusaders tattoo. He also has a separate tattoo that says Deus Vult. Deus Vult, God wills it, which was a saying that was very popular amongst the Crusaders. So I don't know if he's a Catholic or not, but he obviously believes in this stuff, just like what Dr. Maroof is saying here. So Maroof is saying that it's not just, these fringe evangelical pastors and these, evangelical patrons throughout the United States that are giving their money and giving money to Hagee and groups like Hagee's that is going to be eventually used towards the rebuilding of the Third Temple. Maroof is saying that this is majority coming from the United States and these evangelicals. And and he says it's not only these fringe pastors and churches. This is in the Trump administration. This is Pete Hegseth.
It's laid out about the rebuilding of the Third Temple. Obviously, they do. Explain their expansive philosophy. Like, what is it they're looking for?
Well, generally speaking, when we speak about the evangelicals in the United States, who are now controlling, by the way, the current administration in the United States. We have the Minister of War believing in this, the Speaker of the House completely believe in this.
Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. He's saying Mike Johnson believes in dispensational eschatology and believes that the Third Temple needs to be built. Mike Johnson, okay, the Speaker of the House. It's not only in the Trump administration. The Speaker of the House is the accusation that Maroof is making.
Current administration in the United States. We have the Minister of War believing in this, the Speaker of the House completely believe in this. We have the Secretary of State who believe in this as well. So
Marco Rubio.
We have some senators as well who are speaking about
Lindsey Graham, who said that this is a religious war. Other senators, members of the Senate. So it's not only in the Trump administration and the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of War and the Secretary of State and the Speaker of the House. It's also members of the Senate and other and members of the Congress. That it's just not these fringe pastors yelling about that we need to get a missile and blow that Dome of the Rock off so we can rebuild the Third Temple. No, these are members of Congress. These are members of the Trump administration, is what Dr. Maroof is saying.
Believe in this. We have the Secretary of State who believe in this as well. So we have some senators as well who are speaking about the religious wars, about all of these fantasies, or actually believe in this. These parties believe actually in the same ideology that I mentioned before that coincides with the ideology of the Tzionit Hadatit from a religious point of view, which is that the third temple has to be built so that the Messiah comes.
Absolutely.
So it's not about the temple descending from heaven and then the Messiah comes. No. They say that they believe that they are the hands of God and they have to build his house by force. And this is how God has to.
So understand what he's saying, that the fulfillment of the prophecy is not in the hands of God, that it is in the hands of, that's what that Pastor Locke is talking about here. We get usher in. When you usher something in, you're taking an active role in part in ushering in the prophecy, making the prophecy happen. And like I said, what you're going to end up doing is usher in something that you don't want. That's what's going to happen. You're going to end up ushering in something that you don't want at all, Pastor Locke. And the example that I gave is the story of Sariah and Abram, and God giving the prophecy that they're going to have a child that is going to be the fulfillment of all of God's promises. And they go on and they're not having children, and that Sariah gets the brilliant plan that she's going to help God out. She's going to help usher in God's promise. And she tells Abram to sleep with her handmaid Hagar, and you end up ushering in Ishmael. And now we're dealing with, thousands of years later, the repercussions of Sarah helping God usher in his promise. And that's what's going to happen with us trying to help God usher in the prophecy that, I mean, if God gives a prophecy, it's up to God to fulfill the prophecy. We don't need to help God out to usher in his prophecy. But this is what they believe. This is what these Christian dispensational Zionists believe, like Locke here. It says we need to destroy the temple, destroy the mosque, rebuild the temple so we can usher in the coming of Jesus. The Jews, the Kabbalistic Jews, believe that this is part of their Kabbalistic belief, that the temple has to be built so their Messiah can come. So they want to rebuild the temple to usher in their Messiah. This is what Dr. Maroof is talking about here. This is what these people believe. The fanatics and the Christian fanatics and zealots, and the Jewish fanatics and zealots, and the occult as well. I mean, this is the third temple will be an esoteric occult. That's what it will be. It'll be a building, a structure that is dedicated to the occult. I promise you.
It's not about the temple descending from heaven and then the Messiah comes. No. They say that they believe that they are the hands of God and they have to build his house by force. And this is how God has to interfere and has to bring his Messiah. The only difference between the two parties is that the evangelicals believe that Jesus is the Messiah and he will come for the second time. Whereas the religious Zionism stream in Israel believe that it will be for the first time. Now, you might ask, so what? It's quite different. It's a very big difference. Yeah, but I remember I was reading an article a few days ago in Texas, published in Texas, about the red heifer issue, and the red heifer is quite interesting because they are the two people who are working together with this idea. One evangelical in Texas, and one Israeli Jewish rabbi.
So I wanted to ask you about the red heifer. Like, explain that.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you about it.
So he goes into, I don't really have very much time, so he goes into explaining, like I was saying, that the red heifers were actually found in Texas. That this Christian rancher decided that he wanted to help usher in the coming of Jesus, so he was going to be looking out for a red heifer for the Jews, and he started working with a Jewish man who is not a Christian in Israel, and that's the story that Maroof is going to tell here, and how these two different people from these two different belief systems, both working towards the rebuilding of the third temple, one believing that their Messiah is coming for the first time, one believing that their Messiah is coming from the second time, and they're going to usher in the coming of the Messiah by rebuilding the third temple. Now, replacement theology. We're almost done. I want to talk about replacement theology because replacement theology is something that is talked about a lot today with people that believe that the Christian church replaced the Jews and their covenant and this word, or supersession is the other word that is being thrown around a lot. And I've said this before on this podcast, but I want to reiterate this. What the replacement theology that I believe in and that I think is accurate, and that you can make a case using the Bible and the text to why the replacement theology that I believe in is accurate, and why, and that people making this argument, this replacement theology argument, are easily discredited because there's tons of passages in the Bible that prove that the covenant that God had with the Jews is everlasting, and that there's never going to be a into that covenant. And they have a separate covenant. But replacement theology, it says the replacement theology doctrine holding that Christians have replaced the Jews, the Jewish people, as the chosen people of God and heirs to their divine and human covenant, described in the Hebrew Bible. This theology is referred to as supersessionism, in which Christianity is thought to have superseded Judaism. So the replacement theology that I believe in, and I believe that there is a clear scriptural case that can be made that the Christian church did not replace the Jews, but the Christian church replaced the temple. That God now doesn't live in a temple made of human hands. That since the sacrifice of Jesus, that the temple has been replaced with the church, and now the Spirit of God dwells within the church and the members of the church, the people of the church that make up the church, and the church has replaced the temple. The church didn't replace the Jews. You can't make that argument. And the church didn't replace the Jewish covenant, but the church absolutely, and the text shows this over and over again. Jesus and the apostles reiterate this over and over again, that the church is the new temple, that we are the temple. So just hold on to that when we're asking this question about if Christians should be giving money to and working towards the rebuilding of the third temple and erecting a new veil separating God and man. Is that a Christian endeavor? We're going to pick this back up in the next podcast, and we're going to get into the book of Hebrews. I thought we would get into it in this podcast, but we're going to get into one of my favorite books. Again, we don't know who wrote the book of Hebrews. I believe it was Paul. But we'll talk about that in the next podcast. But this is a video that gives you a overview of the book of Hebrews, which we will get into in the next podcast, and asking the questions: should Christians support the rebuilding of the third temple? Should Christians be giving money to and making efforts towards and doing and working with the Jewish people that are aspiring to rebuild the temple? And like I said, when Jesus was crucified and he rose from the dead, and then the Spirit of God came to earth and empowered the early church, the temple was still standing for about 30 years after Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection from the dead. The temple, the second temple, was still there standing. So the book of Hebrews is going to give us some answers about how those early Christians treated the temple and the temple sacrifices that was still standing there before it was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. So this clip breaks down a little bit of the book of Hebrews. or breaks down basically the overview of the book of Hebrews, which we're going to read some of in the next podcast.
The letter to the Hebrews. The author of this letter is anonymous, and people have wondered for a long time whether Paul wrote it or maybe one of his co-workers like Barnabas or Apollos, but really we just don't know. In chapter 2, we discover that the author had a first-hand relationship with the disciples who were themselves around Jesus, so we know that this letter is anchored in the teaching of the apostles. We also don't know who the audience of this letter was or even where they lived. The author knows them really well, and he assumes that they have a thorough knowledge of the Old Testament scriptures, especially the storyline of the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, about how Abraham's family became the nation of Israel, about how Moses led them out of slavery in Egypt to Mount Sinai, where they received the Torah and they made a covenant with God, where they built the tabernacle, where the priests offered sacrifices, and also about how they wandered through the wilderness on their way to the Promised Land. The author just expects that the readers know all of the details about these stories. And so
I think that's funny that he says that you don't know who the audience is, but he expects the reader. He says, but the author expects the reader to know all of this stuff. Well, you know, the audience is, as the book is titled Hebrews, that's the audience. Hebrews.
And also about how they wandered through the wilderness on their way to the Promised Land. The author just expects that the readers know all of the details about these stories. And so most likely the audience is made up of Jewish Christians. That's where the name of the letter comes from. We also have clues from chapter 10 that this church community was facing persecution and even imprisonment because of their association with Jesus. Some in the community were walking away from Jesus and abandoning the faith altogether. And this explains the purpose and the structure of this letter. First, there's a short introduction, which is followed by 4 sections where the author compares and contrasts Jesus with key people and events from Israel's history. Jesus is first compared with angels in the Torah, second with Moses and the Promised Land, third with priests and Melchizedek, and lastly with the sacrifices and the covenant. And the author has 2 main goals in all of these contrasts. The first goal is to elevate Jesus as superior to anyone or anything else, showing that Jesus is worthy of all their trust and devotion. But his second goal is this: it's to challenge the readers to remain faithful to Jesus despite persecution. So in every section, he includes a strong warning not to abandon Jesus. So let's dive in now and see how this all unfolds. The elevation of Jesus begins in the opening sentence of the introduction. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors in many different ways, but in these last days, he has spoken to us in his Son. So the author's saying that Jesus is superior to all of the previous ways that God has revealed himself to Israel. He then makes this astounding claim that Jesus is the radiance of God's glory and the exact imprint of God's nature. These metaphors are making the closest possible identification between Jesus and God. So Jesus is what the rays of light are to the sun, or Jesus is what the wax impression is to the signet ring. For this author, there is no God apart from Jesus. Jesus is God become human as the Son. And it's this elevated view of Jesus that's then explored throughout the rest of the letter. In the first section, the author compares Jesus with angels, which might strike you as kind of odd, like why angels? In Jewish tradition, it was taught, based on Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 2, that the Torah and the words of God were delivered to Moses at Mount Sinai by angels. And so by saying that Jesus is superior to angels, the author is claiming that Jesus and his message of good news are superior to all previous messengers of God's word. And so the first warning flows from this very point. If Israel was called to pay attention to the Torah that was delivered by angels, how much more should we pay attention to the message that was announced by the Son of God? And not only that, given Jesus' status high above the angels, how remarkable is it that he gave up that high status to become human, to suffer, and to die? In Jesus, we see God's greatest glory and God's great humility as Jesus sympathetically joined himself to humanity's tragic fate. In chapters 3 and 4, the author moves on to argue that Jesus is superior to Moses, who led the people of Israel through the wilderness and built the tabernacle. Jesus is also the leader of God's people, but in him we see not the builder of just a tent, but of all creation. Then the author retells the story of how the Israelites rebelled against Moses in the wilderness, and they lost their chance to enter into the rest that God offered them in the Promised Land. And so here comes the second warning. If Jesus is greater than Moses, how much higher are the stakes if we rebel against him? We also are in a wilderness-like environment where we have to trust God for the future rest in God's new creation. So let's make sure that we don't rebel like Israel did in the wilderness and lose out on God's gracious offer to enter his new creation. In chapters 5 through 7, the author then compares Jesus with Israel's priests that come from the line of Aaron.
This is the important part that we'll pick up talking about the position of high priest and how it relates to Jesus as it's written in the book of Hebrews. So this is where we'll probably pick up in the next podcast.
Their role was to represent Israel before God and to offer sacrifices that atoned for or covered over the sins of the people. But, he points out, the priests were themselves morally flawed people, and so they constantly had to offer sacrifices for their own sins as well as for everybody else's. Something more was needed. And so he then argues that Jesus was that something more. He's the ultimate priest. But Jesus did not come from the line of Aaron. Rather,
David.
Jesus was a priest in the order of Melchizedek, that mysterious priest king from ancient Jerusalem, and he appears in the stories about Abraham. We also find in Psalm 110 that the Messianic king from the line of David will be a priest in the order of Melchizedek.
That means a priest and a king. We'll get back into this in the next podcast, but Melchizedek was a priest and a king. Jesus is a priest and a king.
Stories about Abraham. We also find in Psalm 110 that the Messianic king from the line of David will be a priest in the order of Melchizedek. So the author's whole point is this. Jesus is the ultimate priest king. He's morally flawless, he's eternally available for his people, and so he's superior to any other mediator between God and humans. And thus comes his warning in this section. To reject Jesus is to reject one's best and only chance to be fully reconciled to God, so don't do that. Which transitions us into the last comparison in chapters 8 through 10. The author shows how Jesus' death on the cross was the ultimate sacrifice, superior to all the animal sacrifices offered in the temple. Those sacrifices had to be offered constantly, both daily, but also yearly on the Day of Atonement.
We're going to get into this
Jesus
in the next
offered
podcast
his life
too.
once and for all, and it was sufficient to cover the sins of the whole world.
So you don't need a temple anymore. So this is why you don't need a temple anymore. We're going to get into this in the next podcast when we get into the book of Hebrews, but it's explained perfectly why you don't need a temple anymore. Why it is not a Christian endeavor, a Christian mission. You shouldn't be sitting around waiting for a third temple to be rebuilt so you can usher in the coming of Jesus. It's never been a Christian endeavor. And I don't know why it is today.
Which transitions us into the last comparison in chapters 8 through 10. The author shows how Jesus' death on the cross was the ultimate sacrifice, superior to all the animal sacrifices offered in the temple. Those sacrifices had to be offered constantly, both daily, but also yearly on the Day of Atonement. Jesus offered his life once and for all, and it was sufficient to cover the sins of the whole world. And so the author warns the audience from walking away from Jesus. It's like turning your back on a gracious offer of God's forgiveness. Why would you do that? Jesus' sacrifice.
Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Why would you erect the veil separating God and man again and separate man from the holies of holies? Why would you do that? If Jesus paid the price and said that it was finished and now God and man have communion, why would you want to go back to the temple sacrifices? Or would you be supporting anyone going back to temple sacrifices? Why is that necessary?
Warns the audience from walking away from Jesus. It's like turning your back on a gracious offer of God's forgiveness. Why would you do that? Jesus' sacrifice is permanent, he says, and it's the foundation for the new covenant spoken of in the prophets, where all sins are forgiven. So now that the author has elevated Jesus through all of these contrasts, This final section is one big challenge to follow Jesus. So think big picture. In Jesus, they have found God's very word. In Jesus, they have hope for the new creation. Jesus is their eternal priest. He's the perfect sacrifice. And so now they should follow all the great models of faith found throughout the story of the scriptures, and they should remain faithful to Jesus, trusting that despite whatever hardship and persecution, God will not abandon his people. That's the basic flow of thought throughout the letter, which the author calls right here at the very end a brief word of exhortation.
So we're going to get back into the book of Hebrews in the next podcast. Hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you guys on Friday.